Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining today. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat box and I will answer them at the end of the class. Also, you can email me at, I apologize for the little gray box that might pop up. Every time someone tries to join us, Zoom makes the meeting controls pop up. So sorry for that. But thank you for joining this afternoon. My name is Ashley Appling. I'm the Horticulture Extension Agent in Culpeper County, Virginia, serving Culpeper, Madison, and Orange counties. And tonight we'll be talking about, just to start off, backtracking a little bit. This is an introductory class. So we're going to talk about weed control, companion planting, succession planting, and then we're going to dive into some of the vegetables that we see here listed. So we're going to talk about cucumbers, eggplants, peppers, snap beans, green beans, same thing, tomatillos and tomatoes. So we're going to dive into all that. And if time allows, we're going to talk about some tomato diseases towards the end of the class. So let's go ahead and get started. And like I said, my contact information will be at the end of the presentation. And you're welcome to email me if you would like a copy of the slideshow. This presentation is also being recorded, so you can watch it later on our YouTube channel, and I can send out that link as well if you would like. And let's go ahead and get started since we're starting a little late anyway. So, excuse me. Okay, so getting into weeds a little bit. So the most basic definition for weeds is a plant out of place. So basically this plant is competing for space. And again, I apologize for the little gray boxes that might appear. Every time someone joins us, it brings that up, so I apologize. But the weed's basically a plant that's competing for space, nutrients, and moisture. So a lot of weeds are actually beneficial. They can bring in beneficial insects and other types of good things like that. But they do have the potential to harbor insects and diseases, which with our examples later for the tomato diseases, a lot of those can come in and stick around on weeds or in the soil. So it's really important to keep that in mind, clean up the space around your garden, and we're going to talk about that a little bit tonight as well. And if you just joined us, please put any questions you have in the chat box, and I'll get to those at the end of the presentation. So a few things about their beneficial aspects. Some weeds don't look too bad, I guess you could say. They do have aesthetic value. Most of the weeds, or a good many, at least I should say, are edible. So dandelion's edible. Purslane, which is pictured at the very top here, top left-hand side of the pictures, is edible. Dandelion is not on this picture, like I already said, but it is edible as well. Chickweed, which is this middle picture here, is edible. Crest, watercress, crestweed is over on this picture here. The mustards and the lamb's quarter, they're actually all edible plants. But if they're in your vegetable garden, they're trying to outcompete your tomato or your other types of plants like that. So we don't want them there. But if they're off somewhere else, I know a lot of pictures on Facebook and other types of sites, y'all probably seen it as well. A lot of folks making eating dandelions and other types of things like that. So there are benefits. Like I already mentioned, they can attract pollinators and beneficial insects as well. And there is a list of beneficials I can send to y'all if y'all would like. We don't have time to touch on that tonight, but I can send that to y'all as well if you would like. And my contact, if you just joined us, my contact information will be at the end of the presentation. And another thing that should be pointed out, they can provide organic matter to the soil. So they are They are they are the component that way, I should say. If I can get my tongue untied tonight. So how are we going to control these weeds? So you can hand pull them, which is a lot of work, of course. Digging out the weeds in a small garden can work as well. You could cultivate the weeds. That'll work if you're actually tilling your garden. Some people do try to practice no-till in their vegetable garden beds. So it really depends on what scale you're working at. But hand pulling or digging are options that you can try with weeds. Removing the weeds when they're young is the best thing to do. They have less roots. They're not gonna try to hold on real tight to that site that they're growing in. Dandelion would be a whole lot easier to pull up when it's very small. They can get very long tap roots, which make them harder to pull out. And if you leave a section of that root in the soil, you're going to have a new plant come up eventually. Maybe not the next day, of course, but in a couple of days at least. And excuse me. So pulling it when it's young and tender, pulling the weeds when it's after a rainstorm can help you out a lot too. Help you from your hand from getting too tired. One of the key things, especially when you're tilling, you will bring weed seeds up to the surface. And weed seeds can stay in the soils for around 5, 6, 7, 10 years. They can be viable. So viable means that they can sprout and germinate. So when you do till, you bring up all kinds of seeds to the surface, and you have the possibility to actually cause more weed problems by doing that. So there's always that kind of trade-off. A tilled soil, vegetable plants will grow better, but you're just going to have to stay on top of the weeds that you might have pop up in your garden as well. A lot of folks like adding all kinds of organic matter to the compost pile. So we're not really talking about how to make a compost pile tonight. But if the weed has flowered and you actually see some kind of seed starting up on the plant, you don't want to put that in the compost pile, because you're going to be using that compost pile in the years afterwards to enrich the soil, and you don't want to add weed seeds from your compost pile to the soil. And the main takeaway from that is because most compost piles in most backyard gardens actually don't get hot enough to kill weed seeds, so they do stick around. And most compost piles in backyards also don't get hot enough to kill diseases. So a lot of backyard compost piles, or I should backtrack, a lot of commercial compost piles do get hot enough. So if you either get compost from a municipal source, or if you're buying bagged compost, that'll be perfectly fine because they are getting it to certain temperatures. And the commercial and government sites also have standards they have to go by for the compost. So in that situation, you're probably fine. You will have the occasional weed always pop up. Yeah, nipping the problem in the bud, I guess you could say, and not putting in the compost pile to begin with is one of the best routes to go. And there are other options as well. Mulching is a really good option. So you can, we'll talk about a few different mulches on the next couple slides. But the mulch can help shades out the soil. Weed seeds are less likely to germinate. Mulch also retains moisture for your vegetable plants and your herbs. It prevents erosion, especially if you're on more of a sloped kind of location for your vegetable garden bed. It also stabilizes the temperature. So it doesn't get too hot and it doesn't get too cold. It does hold in some temperature that way. So mulch has a lot of different good benefits. And it also eventually breaks down and becomes organic matter for your garden bed as well. So like I said, we'll talk about a couple mulches in the next couple of slides. Planting your plants a little bit closer together and also help shade the soil, prevent weed seeds from coming up that way as well. So you don't want the plants like little sentinels real far apart from each other. you do want them to eventually touch. And that's why I usually talk about spacing in the plant profiles. So we'll have one more class next week to talk about staking and to dive into a little bit more about how close the plants should be together like that. And then cover cropping can be real helpful. You can put down a cover crop in the wintertime. So a lot of people will put down a cover crop like red clover. Crimson clover is really popular. And they can also mix them. So you can mix them with daikon radish. You can mix it with oats. Mixing the clovers with rye is also another good thing that a lot of farmers and homeowners will do. So that would be for the winter time. So you could also cover crop in the summer, but then there's that trade-off. You can't grow vegetables there if the cover crop is there. And but it does help. It helps stabilize the soil, adds organic matter, keeps the weeds from germinating in the wintertime. And a lot of these cover crops can also be used like a mulch in the summer because you're just mowing it down and planting the vegetables directly through the old cover crop that died in the wintertime. So that's a good alternative too. You don't even have to really buy more mulch if you're using the rye clover mixtures of cover crops for the wintertime. So lots of different mulches you can use. Leaves, if you have already access to leaves, you have a lot of large trees around your property, leaves make a great mulch. So you want to mulch it at least 2 to 3 inch, to a 2 to 3 inch layer around the vegetable plants. And just make sure to either run the lawnmower over the leaves first or kind of break them up somehow, because whole leaves will kind of stick together and mat, and they also will blow away. So making sure that the leaves are shredded before you use it as mulch is really important. You can also use bark, so applying a 2 to 3 inch layer of bark. So that's hardwood bark mulch, pine bark mulch you can buy. Maybe you get a source from an arborist. You can use that, but just make sure to use it to layer it for a 2 to 3 inch layer around the vegetable plants. If you put more than that, it actually can cause a lot of different problems. It can keep the soil too wet, which you don't want. So applying 2 to 3 inch layers, fine with bark mulches. Pine needles, apply that to a 4 to 6 inch layer. That's not as common around here as it is further south in the southeast of the United States. North Carolina into Georgia, they use pine needles a lot down that way. It does make a really good mulch though. So, but you do have to add a little bit more, as you can see here, 4 to 6 inch layer for that. And straw is one of the best things you can use. You can use hay, but most times hay is more expensive from what I've seen and from personal experience. And it can also have a lot more seeds and in turn, weed seeds as well in the hay. So using a straw 6 to 8 inch layer, best way to go in that regard. You can use different kinds of inorganic mulches. So newspaper works well, 4 to 6 sheets. So that it's recommended to use the black and white pages. A lot of the color pages starting to use soy inks for that. But unless you've called them and talked to them directly, it's hard to know what kind of ink they're using for the colored sheets. So using the black and white sheets would be the best route to go. So don't do like this picture. Unfortunately, I need to change that out. But this could be soy though, soy-based ink. So it might be totally fine there in that regard. So you put the newspaper down first. Some people will wet the newspaper so it doesn't blow away in the wind. And then you can dig holes directly through it. As you see here, there's corn actually growing between these newspaper sheets. And a lot of folks will put down organic mulch on top of the newspaper. So you could put the shredded leaves, you could put the bark mulches down, anything like that. The straw down, I should say, not the hay. Hay, if you absolutely have to use it, straw would be better for vegetable garden mulches. And I don't say a lot of homeowners use the plastic mulches, but a lot of the commercial growers will use this. And you can buy soy-based plastics now that will break down over time. But a lot of folks still use the regular black plastic mulches. And then you have all this plastic that you have to get rid of at the end of the growing season. So usually the mulches aren't made well enough to last multiple seasons. If you take really good care of it, you might be able to use it multiple years in a row. But usually it'll start having holes and other kinds of issues like that. But it is an option. One good thing to remember, the soil below these mulch will get really hot. So that's an advantage in the early part of the growing season. You get a head start with the vegetable plants, but it can be a problem later in the summer. So make sure to watch out for that as you go forward. And I apologize again if you just joined us. Every time someone joins us, the little gray box will pop up. So I apologize for that. A lot of a good number, I should say, not a lot, a good number, especially the summer vegetables, will germinate quickly enough to outcompete the weeds. So you see beans, corn will do that pretty well. Most of the summer vegetables. So potato would be the outlier, I guess, for that. It's more winter, spring. Pumpkins will outcompete pretty well. It'll provide a canopy and shade out the weeds. As well as tomato plants. So you see a lot of the cool season vegetables don't do it as readily. Either they don't grow very large leaves, or they just grow slowly so that the weeds outcompete them. And that would include like carrots, lettuce, the onions, a lot of the cooler season vegetables. So yeah, but if you can space it close enough together, we'll talk more about staking and spacing in the next class on May 18th. But those are all good options. These vegetables usually will, so you plant them so that they will eventually touch. You don't want them to be too close. You don't want them to be too far. So it's kind of like the Goldilocks kind of scenario. So just right, I guess you can say. But these summer vegetables and the potatoes will help you out with weed control. And companion planting is a good way of working all this together. So we can see here, this is Swiss chard here. It's growing along with marigolds. And the marigolds haven't quite grown together yet, but they will eventually. And you'll have a really nice cover, which is going to shade out the weeds from growing. And this corn and squash in the bottom picture is working very well. So that'd be more like a winter type squash. And you can see there's really no space for the weeds to grow. Everything's touching. All the vegetables are growing together. They're shading out the soil. And that helps with weed control right there. So that's a very good alternative to use. And basically, just like I already mentioned, so the companion planting is planting 2 or more different species. So the squash and the corn would be the best example for that. And it also gives you more opportunities to have something, to harvest something during the summertime. So if you have corn and squash, hopefully if the insects go after the corn, you'll have squash. And if you get the squash bugs and the squash vine borers go after the squash, hopefully your corn will be okay. So you can always plant more than that. Another way to look at that is maybe you plant only tomatoes in your vegetable garden bed. And so you have a real heavy disease pressure on those tomatoes. Maybe you don't do so well that year. You don't harvest a lot. But if you plant squash in between the tomatoes, or if you plant peppers and you plant eggplants and other types of vegetables like that, you at least have some security and you're going to get something. So, so it's not just a monoculture, basically, is what I'm getting at with that too. So planting more than one thing, not being like the big farmers, which can they can usually control pests, and they're usually spraying. So I know in my own vegetable garden bed, I don't want to spray a lot. So planting multiple different species of vegetable plants will really help you in that regard. One of the things that usually comes into play with this kind of stuff is peas, beans, and clover do have the ability to fix nitrogen from the air. And they do this in a symbiotic relationship with rhizobium bacteria in the soil. Sometimes you can actually, you will have to inoculate plants. And what I mean when I say that is that you buy these bacteria along with the seeds, and you coat the seeds in it, and the plants can actually fix the nitrogen that way. Unfortunately, a lot of our soils around here are kind of deficient in the right bacteria. So inoculating it is really good to make sure that the nitrogen fixation process is actually going to work. But it does work really well for companion planting. So you have the corn in this bottom right-hand side picture, and you have these bean plants growing through kind of, they've kind of intertwined themselves between the corn plants. So they're using the corn as a support. They're also helping to fix some nitrogen. They're using up a lot too, but every little bit helps. So every little bit that you can add naturally, and you don't have to add fertilizer to that, can really help you to get going. And we're not going in depth about this. I think I talked more about it last class. But always getting a soil test done is really important, so you know how much fertilizer to add to your vegetable garden bed. So that's something to keep in mind. And you can get a soil testing kit through your local extension office, depending on where you're at. Excuse me. Research has also shown that so it's the African marigold, not the French type. The African has a larger flower head, a larger flower. But African marigolds have been proven to, they do have some nematode repellent abilities, not a lot. So nematodes are little microscopic roundworms that will feed on roots in the soil, and they can cause all kinds of different problems. So planting marigolds in your garden is good for that. They can also attract insects. So thrips will go to thrips are a really small insect we'll get to see a little bit later. But thrips and other types of insects that might eat your vegetables, they can be attracted to the marigolds instead to kind of suppress them on your vegetables. So we have our cabbages and marigolds growing together. So eventually later in the summer, probably in June, late May, early June, you would harvest the cabbages and then start over with some tomatoes or some peppers or something like that. And of course, the marigolds will grow larger in that time. And eventually the soil will be shaded. So, and there is different research that shows this biochemical pest suppression that I mentioned here. Creating beneficial habitats by planting multiple species is very important too. You can have all kinds of different beneficial insects come to your garden, whether they're predatory or parasitic species of insects. And these can include ladybird beetles, lacewings, lots of different, the praying mantis, of course. Using straw on your garden bed has been shown through research to actually bring in some more spiders, different other types of insects like that. Just creates a good habitat for them. So all these good insects are taking care of the bad ones in your garden. And having all these companion plantings and having multiple species, creating a good environment, having flower beds around the vegetable garden area can help with this too. Just having some kind of home for those beneficial insects so they can take care of the pests in your garden. And this is another good example of tomatoes. You have some beans growing here, squash. So just getting just planting multiple different types of vegetables is really important, and can help you reduce your pest control needs, or makes the environment better too, and it just looks better too. You have all these different flowers interwoven, and you have a very pleasant garden to visit when you do this kind of companion planting, like I'm referring to tonight. Succession planting is really important for certain vegetables. So we have a list on the next slide for that. So this example in picture right here is showing beans. So you plant beans maybe mid-May, late May in our area. So these beans have been growing a little while. So of course they wouldn't be quite this advanced because you're planting the beans every couple of weeks. So you plant these beans to start. A couple weeks later, you plant this row of beans. A couple weeks after that, you plant this row of beans, and you keep on going like that, so that you're not getting all the harvest at one time. So that really helps extend your harvest season as well. So that you just keep on, you have vegetables throughout the summer. And you can do that with a wide variety of different vegetables. So the green beans, the snap beans, you can do that with. Southern peas, black-eyed peas, corn you can do that with. So every 2 weeks or even weekly, you can do that. And you keep on going until you hit about 3 to 4 weeks before the, every 3 to 4 weeks. And you stop about 8 weeks before the fall frost. So you have to do some math on there, but you can figure it out. Cucumbers, okra, summer squash, and melons, you can do that with too, but you're gonna scale back. So you probably just do 2 plantings, depending on where you're at. Sometimes you can get away with 4 plantings of those vegetables. So just like I mentioned before, you plant some at the start. About 3 or 4 weeks after that, you plant some more, and maybe that's all you can do for the cucumbers and summer squash. But you keep on going. So you're not depending on the plants that you planted at the very beginning of the season to get you through the entire season. And then you have, you can do the same thing with these other vegetables, the lettuces and the radishes and the beets. You can do that succession planting with those. And then all these cool season crops. You can do a spring crop, plant a couple different timings with that. And then you can plant them again in the fall, in the case of the fall. These fall vegetables at the bottom, like the cabbage, the broccoli, and the Brussels sprouts, etc. So succession planting can work really well. And you won't have all the vegetables come in at one time. And then late summer, you're looking around and you're not really getting a harvest. So succession planting can really work in that case for these vegetables. Other considerations, as the season goes, pulling out any kind of plant that's not looking too good, pulling out plants that have a lot of pest problems, so squash plants that have vine borers, you want to pull those out of the garden as you go. Adding compost before you plant your new plants, like we were talking about with the succession planting, can really help. Making sure, especially later in the season, to keep the seeds moist. Some people will put down like a 2x4 on top of the seeds. You're checking every day, but that can just help to keep the seed bed moist until you start seeing them poke through. Some people will just water every day, so you're not doing a light watering. You are letting the water go into the soil, so you don't just sprinkle and walk away. You are watering it until it cools up a little bit. But you don't want to wash the seeds away, but so you do have to be careful in that regard too. And watering, watering is next week, I think, yeah. So we'll talk a lot more about, not next week, but May 18th. We'll talk more about that. You can also use screening methods. So using shade cloth can help. The natural shade from taller vegetables. So tomatoes, corn, or beans can help with that. So maybe you have some really tall vegetables, and then On the row next to that, you can plant some lettuces in the shade. So that's an example a lot of folks will do. And just planting stuff at the right season can really help too and suppress disease and insect pressures as well. So diving into the vegetables as we're wrapping up tonight. So we're going to start with cucumbers. So cucumbers want a sunny location. They do want, you'll see that well drain pop up a lot for these different vegetables, but you don't want them sitting in water basically. And a soil test will help you with determine the pH. So you'll find out if it's you do want somewhere, there's a wide range for cucumbers. Some of the other vegetables we'll talk about have a smaller range. But cucumbers are about 5.5 to 7. So you get your soil test report back from the down here and around here it'll be from Virginia Tech. So you want your pH somewhere around 6.2 to 6.5. 7 would be good too. And it'll tell you how much lime you need to use to raise the pH. And if you're in the extreme example of having pH that's too high, the soil test report will let you know how much sulfur you need to add to lower the pH. So that's something to keep in mind. And getting the soil tested in the wintertime, or at least in the fall before you're going to grow your vegetables, helps you have time to add the lime and other types of nutrients that you might need. That's something to keep in mind. And they do like hot temperatures, so so planting your cucumbers then really works as well. So we're actually past the frost, or I think last year we had a late frost, and hopefully we don't have another one. But most years we are past the frost at this point, getting towards Mother's Day. So you could still plant it by seed now. Buying transplants or maybe planting your own seed plants you've been growing inside would be really good to do now. And they are a heavy feeder, and so that's referring to nitrogen. So just make sure to fertilize, and you'll get a good crop of cucumbers. And there's lots of different types of cucumbers. Cucumbers can take from 50 to 70 days to maturity. So that's from when you plant the seed until you harvest a cucumber. So if you buy transplants, that time frame of course is shortened. But there's lots of different types. So slicer types, pickle types. There's dwarf vine types, burpless types, of course. But bees are required for pollination, so that's really important to keep in mind. And the male flowers, they have separate male and female flowers on cucumbers, as well as squash plants. So the male flowers will come earlier in the season. So if they fall off, that's fine. But they'll start syncing up eventually, and the bees will pollinate them, and then you'll get lots of cucumbers as you go forward. So here's just an example of the different types. Pickling types, of course, like the Kirby. We could grow Persian types, English types here. You can grow different cucumbers to your heart's delight. And cucumber usually grows pretty well, doesn't have a lot of issues, and is a good vegetable to try, especially if you're just starting out in the vegetable garden bed. Eggplants are actually a little bit trickier. They get a lot of problems, which we'll talk about in the next slide here. They also require a sunny location. Moist soil, you see they take a lot longer, 100 to 150 days from seed. But most people start out with transplants with eggplants. You're going to the garden center or somewhere like that and buying started plants. So after the danger of frost is passed, that's when you plant eggplants. You pick the fruits when they're about 2/3 the size, at 2/3 the size. So you don't want a humongous eggplant. You pick it, it's turning purple or whatever color it's going to turn. You'll see there's some eggplants that are white. But 2/3 the size of maximum. So like the giant ones in the grocery store. At home, you want to pick them a little bit smaller. So they'll taste better, and they won't be as bitter sometimes as eggplant can be as well. So lots of different diseases can hit eggplant. Verticillium wilt can hit eggplant pretty bad. So that's like a root rot disease. Flea beetles can be very, very bad. Colorado potato beetle will attack eggplant. Spider mites and whitefly. So making sure to rotate the crops. So crop rotation means don't plant the same vegetable in the same spot year after year. So you want to break it up. You plant eggplants one year, you wait a couple of years, plant something else, maybe squash or corn, and then you can plant the eggplants again after that. So Mission Bell, Black Knight, and Little Fingers are good eggplant varieties for our area. And of course, there's more than that. These are just the ones that Virginia Tech commonly recommends. And here's an example, a wide variety, of course, of eggplants that you can grow in your garden. Peppers are really fun to grow. They don't have a lot of problems, usually pretty easy. Bell pepper, I've almost never had luck with. But all the hot ones, all the hot types like jalapeno and serrano and habanero grow really well in our area. The poblano types, if I cannot butcher names tonight, that usually works well, grows well here as well. So they take a long time. Moist soils, so not too wet. They don't want to sit in wet soil. Transplant after all frost is over. Most people will buy started plants. You can grow them from seed inside and then plant them out. So if you're growing it from seed, you're starting it in mid to late April inside in your house, or even late March. Some people will even start it then. And then you can plant the plants outside. And there's lots of different types. Spacing at about 18 to 24 inches is a good practice for that. And there's tons of different types of peppers. So you could try bell type peppers around here, bananas, peppers, pimentos, and sweet cherries. And then the hot ones, of course, like I've already mentioned, Tabasco, jalapeno, all those different types of peppers as well. So Mission Bell is a good variety around here. Jalapeno, most of the jalapeno cultivars you'll find for sale. Red cayenne, and many, many more, of course. Snap beans are the ones that are really, really good for the succession planting I was mentioning. And they do like it hot, even moisture, don't like waterlogged soils like we've mentioned many times for all the other vegetables. Seed after frost is no chance of frost. 4-inch step, so you got the little bean seed, little bean, you plant it 4 inches deep. You plant your row of them or your large collection of them, and then plant it every about 2 weeks for a continuous harvest throughout the summer. And rows can be about 2 to 3 feet apart, and you do need some kind of trellis if you're growing the pole type beans, so about 6 to 8 foot trellis. And we're going to talk more about trellises in the May 18th class coming up later in the month. So bush types, there's tons of different bush types as you can see on this slide. Blue Lake, Kentucky Blue are really good varieties, and maturity dates just kind of depend on the type you buy. Just a few examples here. You can buy red types too. The Red Swan is a really nice one. Gold Rush is a nice bean. And then Kentucky Blue is really good too. Tomatillos are very, very nice. If you like salsa verde and other types of Hispanic Latino dishes like that, it grows very well. I really likes it really hot, 80 to 90 degrees average during the summer is what it likes, or even hotter. And it just needs some water and it'll keep on going. So very tough plants. So space them about 2 feet apart, 5 foot between rows. One plant can produce up to 60 to 200 fruits. So they're very interesting looking. They have like a little paper outside and the fruits in the middle of that little papery material. We'll have a picture coming up. But salsa verde, salsa soups, Mexican strain, pineapple, purple types, and there's tons of different types. And if you never tried them, they just grow really, really well around here. So this is looks like a little paper lantern, kind of, and the fruit grows inside of that, and it'll kind of open up, and that's when you know that they're ready to harvest. So there's purple types, of course, and green is the most traditional color for tomatillos. And you see there is like one of those small wire tomato cages. That just helps to keep them up. And that will work perfectly for a tomatillo plant. They don't usually get heavy enough to fall over if you use that. And then diving into tomatoes. I know this is usually everyone's favorite. So after frost, of course, they like it hot. If it's above 90 degrees Fahrenheit, they will have pollination issues. The pollen grains actually get they get too wet and they stick together. So you can walk out there with with your finger and kind of tap the flowers, and that'll shake it loose. Some people use electric toothbrushes to kind of vibrate the flowers, and that's ways to get around it. But they usually pollinate themselves and grow well. But that's just an issue you could run into. So spaced about 18 to 36 inches apart, either staked or caged. So we're going to talk about trellising next month. You can usually get about 10 to 15 pounds of fruit on average. And there are determinate and indeterminate varieties, which we're going to talk about coming up. Temperature, we've already touched on. Blossom end rot can be a really big problem. I'll have a picture of that coming up. And that's actually a physiological disorder. It's actually low calcium. There's no disease or insect involved. And yeah, it's coming up after this picture here. So when you're looking through seed catalogs or you're buying it online, you'll see tomatoes described as indeterminate and determinate. So indeterminate grow more like a vine. They'll just keep on growing the entire summer. And you'll harvest fruit, tomatoes along it for the entire summer, just like I already mentioned. And the bush types will grow to a certain stage. All the fruit ripens within 1 to 3 weeks, and they might make one here and there for the rest of the summer, but the big harvest is actually all at one point. And some of the Roma type tomatoes will be determinate. The seed catalog will tell you. But the vast majority of the heirloom type tomatoes are indeterminate varieties. And one good way to plant tomatoes, you buy this plant you either grow it yourself or you're buying it from a garden center. And you see it's kind of leggy usually, a really long stem. And you can actually plant them sideways, like it's showing here. And they will produce roots along the entire stem, all the way that's under the soil. And you can produce more roots, have a healthier plant by planting them a little bit deeper. So if you have never tried that before, give it a shot. You'll have a healthier plant by doing that. And here is blossom end rot that I was mentioning earlier. So it's kind of mushy on the bottom. If you've had tomatoes do that, that's a lack of calcium. So most garden centers and nurseries will sell a calcium spray that you can spray on the plants. Another way to get around this is just try to keep the moisture as even as possible. So if it's not raining enough, you have to water because calcium is brought up from the soil. And if there's not enough water, the plant can't bring calcium up and has all kinds of different issues. So if you ever see this is a calcium problem. That's not a disease. That's not an insect problem at all. And lots of different good varieties. Big Beef, Mountain Spring, Better Boy is really popular. Celebrity's a good cherry type. Sweet 100 is a good cherry type. It does crack sometimes, but it's usually really nice. And Plum Dandy is another nice tomato. And of course, there's tons of different cultivars as well. So try what you like, and you never know, might grow perfect around here. So finish us off tonight. I'm going to talk about some tomato diseases. I know tomatoes are always it's the vegetable we get most more questions about than anything else in the extension office here. So you might see this disease on the leaves every once in a while. This is Septoria leaf spot. There are fungicides you can apply that are safe for vegetable plants, like daconil and some of those fungicides like that. But usually people will try to pull off the bottom leaves, and you can try to prevent the disease like that. Avoiding overhead watering can help too. So either watering by hand at the base of the plants or by using a soaker hose system or something like that. You can try to prevent this. Spacing out the plants enough so that there's still some airflow around it can really help too. So you're just trying to keep the leaves as dry as possible. And this will usually start at the base, and it'll move up during the summertime until your whole plant looks like this. And it starts losing leaves. So this is a disease that you've probably seen. Almost everybody has this disease in the tomato bed. And then the very late summer, your plants will start looking like this. You might run into early blight. That's another disease you might see in your tomato garden bed. You're going to see these concentric round circles on the leaves. And that's when you know you have early blight. Don't let the name fool you. It's a disease you can have during the entire summer. So it does like warm, wet weather. And if we have a lot of rain during the summertime, a lot of thunderstorms, you might run into this problem here. And it can also infect the stems. So we have these lesions along the stems. And usually these plants just have to be tossed out. You can try the fungicide option. I know a lot of people don't like applying stuff like that in the vegetable garden. But some people will just throw these plants away if they have these issues like this. And that doesn't mean put it in the compost pile. They're literally bagging it up, taking it to the landfill, or you could burn it as well. And if it gets really advanced, this is what it would look like on the tomatoes themselves. Another picture on the leaves. It kind of looks like a bigger version of Septoria. So the circles will be bigger on the leaves. Phytophthora is an early season tomato disease you might run into. This is what caused the potato blight in Ireland back in the 1820s, 1830s. So this will infect potatoes as well. And it's common early in the season, or if we have cool, wet summer, it could appear then too. It usually gets the tomato plants a frost-like look, frost damaged look, kind of crunchy leaves. And if you see that, throwing the plants away is usually the best alternative. Yeah, that's really the usual thing we recommend, and that Virginia Tech recommends if you see this problem on your plants. And you see that even the fruits kind of look like they got cold damage, but this is actually a disease if you see this in the summertime. Verticillium wilt is another fungal disease that'll attack the stems and the root system. So this is why we usually recommend crop rotation with tomatoes. You'll have these yellow leaves that start at the tip and go up. And if you cut a stem off and actually cut it across, you'll see these black streaks in the stem, and that's when you know you have verticillium. And destroying the plants, pulling them up, and getting them out of the garden bed is what you should do. Fusarium also something to look out for. That's usually later in the growing season in August, late July, August, September is when you run into this usually. And it's the general overall wilt and collapse of the plant. Sometimes you'll run into tomato spotted wilt virus, not very often though. And it's spread by these little thrips, and they cause all kinds of different issues on the leaves and the fruit. And we have a dime right here, and you can actually see these little kind of golden colored on this yellow sticky trap. Those are thrips. You can see how small they are. And they cause all this damage on the leaves, and they can spread the virus. And usually these plants will look kind of, they won't be very vigorous looking. They won't grow a lot of fruit, and destroying the plants again. As I said multiple times, is what you have to do with these plants as well. 3-year rotation, so you plant tomatoes, don't plant them for about 2 to 3 years. So that means you're planting squash and beans or something else in between that time period. And then after that time, you can plant them again in your bed, in your garden. Watering at the base can help a lot. You want to keep the leaves as dry as possible. Using one of the mulches we mentioned is really important. And then just pruning off any kind of diseased leaves that you see before it takes over the whole plant. And air circulation, that's really important as well. A lot of cultivars you'll either buy in the nursery or through the seed catalog will have these little letters next to their names. And that means they're resistant to these diseases we've talked about today. So if you see a V, it's resistant to the verticillium wilt we mentioned. An F is resistant to the fusarium wilt we mentioned. N is resistant to nematodes, the mosaic virus we mentioned with a T there. And yeah, all these means the hybrid is resistant. So a lot of the heirlooms are not. They're not resistant, so you won't see these letters for those. So it's kind of like a crapshoot for that. You're just hoping that nothing happens. But some heirlooms are resistant, some aren't, but they usually won't say it in the seed catalog. And lots of good resources, and here's my contact information. So if you have any questions or you'd like a copy of this presentation or the link to the recording, just contact me. Email me and I can send that to you. And let's get into see if there's any questions. Oh yeah, you can definitely use pine needles for sure. Sarah. Any other questions? That is it for tonight. And like I mentioned, just let me know, email me and I can send you a copy of this presentation. And the recording will be up on our YouTube channel. And I can send that link to you as well. And we do have a class on May 18th, which you have to register for separately from tonight's link. So it's a different link. Just register for the class. Let me know if you want to attend. And yeah, May 18th will be we'll talk about trellising and watering and all the vegetables we haven't talked about yet. So the watermelons and cantaloupes and all types of stuff like that. Any questions? Oh, yes, I think I emailed you back, Angela, about that. I apologize if it didn't. A lot of our emails are going to the spam folders, unfortunately. It seems like recently. Wildlife deterrent plants, there aren't actually plants that you can specifically grow, especially not in the vegetable garden bed. You can, a lot of herbs, wildlife, rabbits and deer don't like, so they won't eat those, but they'll just walk over those to get to your vegetables. Fencing is the best thing to use. Unfortunately, I know it's kind of costly. Marigolds will work for some of the smaller vegetable pests, like the thrips we mentioned tonight. and the nematodes, but it won't work for any of the bigger rabbits or deer or anything like that. You can try some of the repellents that you can spray on the plants. That can work. But you have to reapply it every time it rains, and deer and rabbits will get used to that. So you have to switch it up and try a different product every couple weeks or every month at least. Unfortunately, yeah, there's not any plants you can specifically plant. There are plants that deer just don't like to eat, but usually they'll walk around it and walk to your vegetables. Oh, all the good bugs. You can planting flowers is really important. So whether that's nasturtiums or marigolds or something like that, interspersed between your vegetables is really important. Having either a perennial or a shrub border close to your vegetables. All the good bugs can go in those when your vegetables aren't there, and they can stick around. So just having a good environment mixed with all kinds of different plants can help you bring in more beneficials. And not having a monoculture, so not just having tomatoes, planting tomatoes and squash can help bring in more beneficials too, and not spraying a lot. Spraying if you absolutely have to, but doing that as the last alternative also can help to keep the good bugs there. Yes, that is true. It can make it look really nice too as well. Any other questions? So it is a little bit after 7. I do want to end on time. Oops, coming in fast now, I guess. Oh, wow, all the way down the Caribbean. Hopefully you found something interesting, especially being a lot further south than us. Sure. Just send me a reminder email if you want the link to the recording, and I can send you a copy of the slides if you would like to. Just send me an email tomorrow so I can remember to send it to y'all if y'all want that. And Angela, I'll send you the publication about the deer and wildlife too. That talks about more control strategies. And if you have any other questions, just go ahead and email me, and I'll try to answer to the best of my ability. So thanks again for joining tonight. Hope y'all are staying safe wherever you are. I know we had thunderstorms come through here. And please join us again on May 18th. So you can either find the link on our Facebook page, email me directly, and I can get you registered that way. And yeah, hope you have a wonderful night, and take care.